this is all about an introduction to MyScope. Now, MyScope is our free online training platform, and particularly in this time of lockdown and remote working and having limited access to instruments and hands-on training, we thought we'd present this to you to really give you that bit more opportunity to get involved in some training, excuse me, and help your users to do some training even if they can't come and spend some time with you on the instruments. So, okay. Now, hang on, there we go. Right, so MyScope has been developed by our Microscopy Australia microscopists specifically with the view to train new microscopists. So, to give you a bit of a background of just who Microscopy Australia is and who are we to be making training resources. So this is just a bit of a map of our facility. We have our major facilities here at the research intensive universities around Australia. We also have links to a whole array of other facilities that can all providing open access to researchers who need to use microscopy. So it really is a collaborative structure that enables researchers to come in and use the instruments they need to do their research. Now, we occasionally do research, do the actual microscopy for researchers, but we do encourage researchers to become microscopists. So at these facilities around the country, we provide instruments and expertise across a wide range of technique groups. These are very high-level descriptions of what we offer, and within each of these are huge ranges of techniques, as I'm sure many of you will be well aware. So this is the kind of breadth we have. Many of these techniques and instruments are common across many of our facilities, whereas others, such as some of the ion probes, atom probes, etc., are located in one or maybe two of our facilities, but everybody can access those. We also have great experts who really help our researchers who come to us to get the most out of their training. So, as I'm sure you're aware, modern microscopes are complex, they're expensive, and they're specialized. And the research done by the researchers demands well-trained users to be supported by highly skilled staff. So, not only does that mean that the researchers can get the best out of their instruments, but it actually protects the instruments against misuse. Of course, you don't want to just let people loose on instruments without the appropriate level of training. But the training for all of this takes time. But as we also know, training is vital to get this level of expertise up in the people who are going to be using our instruments. So what we decided to do, because we have so many new users coming in each year, we decided to take an approach to save time from our expert staff who, rather than helping the experienced users to get some really top-notch results, they were spending an awful lot of their time training some very basic users. So we developed this MyScope online training. It was developed by over 100 of our Microscopy Australia experts. Initially, we got this going back in, 10 years ago, we started developing MyScope, and initially 6 modules were developed for the major techniques. We now have 10 modules, and this is growing constantly. We're revamping the old modules and adding new ones. So when you go to MyScope, you will see that some of them are still the old modules with simulators requiring flash. Others are being updated and have the new new simulators, and they will all have the new simulators by the end of the year, by the time that Flash is no longer available. Now, the simulators are really at the heart of MyScope. They are technique driven, they're not instrument specific. So we didn't want to be just putting up interfaces for specific instruments or from specific vendors. We wanted people to understand the concepts for the techniques that they need to be understanding controls of. So we've got a very generic interface, but that is typical of what we want beginner users to learn. Now, MyScope has been incredibly successful. It's now used around the world. Excuse me. And it really has become the leading microscopy training resource available online. Now, also, you may not have picked up there, but it's free. It's also openly accessible, so you don't need to register or subscribe or log in. You simply go to the website and use it. And in case you missed it, it's free. So just some of the advantages of using MyScope in your training. It's really good for managing the diversity of the microscopy, novice microscopists who come in to your facility. Now, these could be very young students who have basically barely seen a microscope before, right through to experienced microscopists in one technique who may be needing to move over and try a new technique. They may have come, from incredibly varied backgrounds. And what we really want to do with MyScope is to get this diverse cohort of users up to a level where they can then have a fairly uniform level of knowledge, so that when they come in to the facility for face-to-face training, when the people doing the training are not wasting a lot of time in going over the really basic things. That is all covered through MyScope. It also gives learners the ability to progress at their own pace. So, that can be quite important, gives them more confidence. They can go back, go over it and over it and over it as many times as they want to really get in there and understand it. The online format also helps to overcome various cultural and language barriers that can be encountered when we get a large array of international students and researchers coming into a facility whose English may not be, or whatever language is not necessarily as good as you might hope. Also, different cultural ways of learning may make it students more reluctant to ask questions, and this way they can just go over it until they're really comfortable that they understand the content. So MyScope is really suitable for a whole range of learners, from undergraduates. A lot of teachers of undergraduate university courses use MyScope as part of their course. Postgraduates, whether coursework or research postgraduate students who are learning microscopy or learning some theory, can benefit hugely. A whole range of researchers, from PhD students right up to professorial level people who are still doing hands-on research, can come in and learn their new techniques and really get stuck into some great research. It's also really valuable for core facility staff who running core facilities. They might want to get a bit more of an understanding of other techniques than their own. For managers to get an idea of what these techniques involve, for industry users. So there's a really wide range of different uses for MyScope. So this is what the interface looks like. These are the different tiles. Here are the different modules that we have. Now, most of them have simulators, so they do cover theory and simulators, and I'm going to go through that in a minute. Basic microscopy is for people who really have not done much before. It's good, advisable to send them through the microscopy basics module. We also have a work health and safety module here, which is pretty universal and just alerts people to the things that they should be aware of. The rest of these modules covering all these techniques are basically theory and simulators. So this is, I'm going to use the scanning electron microscopy module as a demo here. So I'm just going to step through some things in that one. But I would certainly encourage you to go away and explore the various different modules, the ones of interest to you. Now, so if we look here across this area of tabs at the top, we have theory tab, a practical tab, assessments, glossary, and explore. So we tend to encourage people to do the theory part first. Obviously gives all the background, divided into sections. Here, this is collapsed, so there's quite a lot within each of these sections, and we can have a look at that in a bit. So we can then go on. Now, this is the practical simulator part of the SEM module. The simulator here, as I mentioned earlier, is not aligned to any particular vendor's interface. It's not branded, it's not copied. It simply has the different features that you would encounter in an SEM interface. We've got our accelerating voltage, the beam on, the spot size, working distance. We've got brightness, contrast, and magnification dials here. Coarse and a fine focus, and an X and a Y astigmatism, and then your scanning rates along the top. There's also options to save the image and print the image, which can be really useful in other situations, which I'll come to in a bit. So moving across to the assessments tab here, we give them the opportunity to test the knowledge that they've learnt in the theory part. Also, the practical would certainly support that. And they have a series of, at this point, multiple choice questions with feedback. So it won't tell them the right answer, but it will give them some clues as to what they can go back and explore further, or to think about a bit further. So we have set a pass mark on these tests of 80%. If learners get an 80% pass mark on this assessment, they will get a certificate to say that they have passed that. And the way we do it is that when new users come to the facility, we send them to MyScope, get them to do the thing, come back with their certificate, and only then can they get booked in for face-to-face training on the instruments that they're interested in using. That ability in the simulator to save an image is another thing that can be used along with the certificate, not only to say that they've got the theory under their belt, but that they have actually shown that they can produce a decent image on the simulator. So that the image and the certificate can be brought along to the facility and presented to the trainer to say that yes, they have achieved that, and let's now get them booked in for some face-to-face training. Right, so just moving across the top here some more. There's a glossary here with a whole array of definitions that they may come across that they want to check. And then in the Explore tab, there's some useful links where they can go and find out a lot more about SEM-related material. So also at the on the front of the module, which is actually, you can just see at the back under here, tailor this module, it's underneath the module contents. You can tailor this module, which means if you're a trainer, or this is particularly used a lot with undergraduate teaching and coursework, you can actually select which part of the modules you want your students to go to. So initially, when you click tailor this module, a list of all the sections comes up here, and they're all checked, and you can go through and uncheck the ones that you don't want to include. This could be whole sections here, or just an individual section that you don't want them to know. When you then click done, you get this link that you can copy that link and then send that out to your students. So that can be really useful if you you don't want them getting bogged down in other sections, but just focusing on particular parts of the module, or maybe you want to break it up into chunks for an extended course that you do a couple of modules this week and a couple of segments this week, a couple of segments next week, and that can be really helpful. So. Okay, so before I move on to actually do a demonstration on the SEM Simulator, I wanted to highlight this little button down the bottom, which is essentially a version of the SEM module, but for kids. So I thought that was definitely worth mentioning at this stage, because I know certainly in Australia, I'm not sure about different parts of the world right now, a lot of our children are doing a lot more remote and online learning, whether at home or partly at school. And MyScope Explorer is a fantastic online resource for kids to discover. This is the front page. It has a lot of information about basic, magnification. What is magnification? What is focus? So really it's very also tailorable for kids really from about 7 or 8 upwards. You can go into as much detail as you want. It can, if the kids are really interested in the physics and the engineering side, how does an SEM work and all the different parts. But then there's the activity. Let's zoom in activity is really simple. But there's also the simulator and challenges, and a whole lot of extra activities, particularly relevant for teachers. So this, for instance, is the simulator, the SEM simulator for the kids, which basically has the same controls apart from astigmatism. I thought that was maybe a step too far for the younger ones. So we've just got these controls, and there's 70 different samples that they can really do some great discovery-based learning. So that's a bit of an aside, but it might be something that you might like to pass on to your kids' teachers, or if you're doing a lot of teaching with your kids at home yourselves, that's a nice one to help understand what you're doing. So again, this is just some web addresses that you might find useful. Micro.org.au is our Microscopy Australia website. MyScope Training, highlighted here in yellow, is the web address for MyScope. MyScope Explore, that I just showed you, the kids version. We also have a Microscopy Australia YouTube channel that we're just getting up and running. We will put the recording of this presentation up there for you to come back to or share with other people who may be interested. And we will be putting up other webinars and training activities that we are starting to produce more now during this particular time. We also have a Twitter handle here, MicroAU, and we share news, and we put up MyScope Explore challenges, and we are announcing various different webinars and activities that we'll be conducting during this time through a Twitter channel. Right, so now I'm going to take you through a demonstration of MyScope. So this is now the live site here. So if we go through here, click on the scanning electron microscope thing, you can see this is what I showed you earlier with the tailor this module. The SEM simulator you can either access here from this button here, or in through the practical tab, as I showed you. So I'm going to click on the SEM simulator. Now, one thing I might just point out here is that depending on the screen that you have, it may go off the bottom. So to get over that, we just push this in from the side, and this way we can see the entire screen here. So what we're going to do is just step through it as we would if you're using it. Now, this panel at the top here gives you the instructions, and so we'll follow these instructions here. So first of all, we vent the chamber, and we have this video here. Now we need to open the chamber, so the various buttons light up as they need to be pressed. So we open the chamber, we can see the samples getting put in, and we close that up. Right, and then we need to pump the air out of the chamber, so we're evacuating here. That's all good. And then we have a selection of samples here. I'm going to click on wood. Now, so again, we're seeing our instructions up here. So we're going to set the accelerating voltage. I'm going to choose 10. Now we turn on the electron beam here. And here are our instructions that tell us people what are the different things doing, so we can go through and have a look at those. So we can do that. Right, so now we can click here to see an example of an optimal micrograph. So this is what we're aiming at. So I think this is really important because it really helps to show people how good you can get this image, because one thing you can often notice is that people think, oh yeah, that's pretty good, and then it's really nowhere near as good as it can be. So we can either close that or move that off to the side. So I'm just going to put that down to the side for the moment, and move that over there, I think. Okay, right, so that's that. So I'm now going to click on my spot size and my working distance. So you can see as we make these different changes, the image on here changes, and each time it comes up differently. So you can't, for instance, sort of remember how it was and just go for that when, you know, each time it's going to come up differently. So first of all, I'm going to turn up the brightness here. So we don't twiddle these. No, if you start zipping them backwards and forwards, that's not such a good idea, but we want to just move them gently, and you can move them anywhere in this thing here. So we've got I might just take that brightness up a little further. Okay, that's not too bad. So now, so I'm doing this live, and I'm not an SEM person, so please forgive me, because I'm sure many of you are far more expert than I am. So with this focus, we're going to have a bit of an adjustment here. So I'm going to get this about there, I think is pretty good. And then we're going to go for the astigmatism adjustments here. I'm trying to get this looking a bit sharper. It's coming back the other way. Now we can also, should be automatically on the TV rate, but we can set that. Right, so now I'm going to, okay, this is looking a bit better. Okay, that's not looking too bad. So let's try a slow scan on that and see how we're going. So that's getting a bit better, but I'm going to try a bit more focus happening here. Now, if not quite so good with the using the dial, you can also, once you've selected a dial, you can make adjustments with the arrows on your keyboard or laptop. So this is something that we keep going backwards and forwards and trying to get this as good as possible, which you can see it's no mean feat, and I'm not going to put you through my attempts to get this as good as I possibly can, but you can see the idea that you have to be careful, you have to be thoughtful and approach this carefully. It's not a matter of just doing mad, you know, oh, let's just twiddle the knobs and yeah, we'll get a picture. We need to get something, you know, you need to put in time and effort to get this to be good. So I'm going to leave that there. So you can see we're now doing a slow scan on that. And whereas this is nowhere near as good as that one, I'm not sure if you can see that as well over the compression of the Zoom, but you can get the idea that it is going to take a bit of work. And like I say, I'm not going to put you through me making tiny little adjustments while you sit and grit your teeth, while you can see how way better you'd be at that than I am. So I am now going to stop this demonstration and open up to questions through the chat. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen for the moment so I can see some of you. If you want to come, most of you are not on your video, but let's see. Yeah, let's see what questions we have. Right, please either type in your questions into the chat and I'll do what I can to answer them. So I hope you found that useful. And I can only encourage you to go and have a look at MyScope and have a good go yourselves, because it really can be extremely helpful in your training to learn yourself or to put it onto various different, you know, your users, to really help them to make the most of this time. Okay. So yes, there's a question here. Is this free access everywhere? Yes, absolutely it is. That if you go to that web address from anywhere in the world at any time, you can just jump on and use it, just like I did. That was what I did. I just clicked on the web address and that came up. So there's no subscription, there's no registration, just go in and use it. So, okay, another question. Is there EDX-WDS in the electron microscopes? Yes, there's an EDS module in the list. Let me just come back here and I will share my screen again. Right, so here is energy dispersive spectroscopy. So yes, EDS is covered in there. Right, let me stop sharing again. Right, what else have we got in here? Thank you. Is there any plan to change or increase the number of samples, to have biological, physical, geological samples, for example? For MyScope, no, there's no particular plans to make the range of samples a lot bigger, mainly because we're really trying to just show people the approach to using the SEM, rather than giving them a wide range of examples of how different samples look. There will be some discussion of, there is some discussion of different kinds of samples and what you need to do for different kind of samples in the theory section. And we wanted to have a bit of a range, but really it's not designed to do that. MyScope Explorer, on the other hand, yes, the whole idea is for kids to get in there and make lots of discoveries of lots of different kinds of samples. So for the kids, yes, it's a tool to make discoveries. MyScope is a tool to train people how to use an SEM. Okay, so what else have we got here? Is there an EELS module? No, there isn't an EELS module as yet, and that's something. I mean, we're always reviewing what we do put in into MyScope, and we do have some new modules under consideration. EELS could be something that could be extended in with the EDS perhaps, and to make a more expansive microanalysis module, but that's not there at the moment. Now this is how long is a piece of string question. We have roughly how long does it take a new user to run through each section or technique? I really couldn't possibly say, and the different modules are somewhat different. I think, you know, it could be, you know, anything from a few hours to, you know, a week, depending how really how intensively they go through it, how attuned they are to the content. So it's really a matter of go in there and have a look yourself at what you think that you or your learners can do. And as I said, if you're running a course, you can break it down into chunks through the Tailor this module application. So yeah, so you can break it into chunks for the learners, or yeah, they can just make their way through it at their own speed. So how fast will the scope be on the web? I'm not quite sure what that means exactly. All I can say is, you know, it is a simulator, and our developer tries very hard to make it as responsive as possible, but obviously speed will depend on your various different connections. So I can't really add much more to that one. Who can we contact if we have a problem? I tried the TEM simulator yesterday and the videos for changing samples didn't run. Okay, now you can contact me if you have a problem. The TEM simulator and the TEM module is still the initial, the first generation module, and I know there have been some problems with that, for which I apologize, and we're working as best we can to get the new module up and running as soon as possible, but unfortunately there are some limitations in those older modules, which is why we're updating them and making sure that everything runs smoothly with the new code into the future. I will at this stage just make a comment that I had a notification from someone just the other day that the SEM focus and astigmatism wasn't working on Chrome. Now, it had previously worked on Chrome, but they update every 6 weeks or so, and the current version of Chrome out there does have this problem. Our developer's been working on that, but hasn't been able to solve it, although he said as a developer, he can find out that the next version of Chrome, he can get access to that. It doesn't have that problem. So given that these things change and there are so many browsers and platforms and technologies out there, trying to keep on top of everything is pretty tricky. So do let me know if you encounter any problems, and we certainly do what we can to get them fixed as soon as possible. Yeah. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? Any plans to expand with EBSD and WDS? EBSD is something that we are thinking about, that we could move ahead with something like that in the future, but there is a long list and we only have one developer and we have a lot of our staff put in the content. but they obviously do that in addition to their normal work. But we are, I must say, we are taking advantage of this time where there is reduced hands-on to instruments, and our staff are actually making additional contributions into MyScope, which is fantastic. So watch this space for the EBSD. We may also be doing some workshops in that space as well. Okay, are you planning to make a scope explore for light microscopy? Yes, there is. A MyScope explore for light microscopy. Not at this stage. We would need to specifically have funding to do that. We were very lucky to have a partnership with FEI, as it was at the time, now Thermo Fisher, who supported the development of MyScope Explore. If we were able to secure such a partnership and interest, that is something that we could potentially explore, but there are no immediate plans for that. Yes, as far as do we have, you know, are we open to ideas for improvement? Absolutely. Send any ideas to me. Yeah, we will see how we can do that. Right. Okay, so I think that's it for the questions. Okay, no, we've just had another one come in. Is it possible to communicate to ask questions and provide guidance? We don't have that capability at the moment. As I think I mentioned, the MyScope was really aimed to support our core facilities in their face-to-face training. So it's developed so that they would, the users would do MyScope first, and then come back and do the face-to-face training with one of our staff. So that's kind of the approach that we've taken. So if there are people doing this in an isolated fashion with no connection to a microscopy facility, I think, I mean, people do ask questions of us, but there isn't really that facility to have a lot of backwards and forwards with our staff. But I think you could only really recommend that they contact their local microscopy facility and perhaps arrange for some face-to-face time with one of the local microscopy people. But if there are any technical issues or things that you think, you know, may be wrong or weren't clear, then certainly let us know and we can try and address those. But we're not really in a position to provide individual responses to individual isolated users, unfortunately. Okay. Are there any other questions? If anybody would like to, okay, we just have a question here. Is there a browser you would recommend over Chrome? I have been using Firefox. That's my default browser, so that is working fine. I can't comment on any other ones at the moment. We try to make it compatible with all the major browsers, but as they get updated, like I spoke to our developer just an hour or two before this session, and he said he'd identified a particular piece of code that was the problematic one, and that was fixed in the next one. So it's really hard to keep on top of all of that, but we do our utmost. So if you're having trouble in one browser, then try another, basically. Let's see. Right, so what I was thinking of doing now is to stop recording, and if anybody wants to ask any questions that are not part of the recorded session, we can do that. So let's actually stop recording now.